Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, as Emerson, Lake, and Palmer once put it. Good to have you here. I'm Tad. I'm still Tad. I intend to remain Tad for at least a while because, well, that's just the easiest thing for me to do and be. And I hope the rest of you are also well situated in whatever position or place or existence you may have found for yourself in this world. Let me just check and make sure all this stuff is going through. Yes, it does appear to be doing that. Okay, so excuse the complicated intro as usual. I'm just trying to figure things out. Okay, there we go. So, hi, good to see you all. I'm still Tad. I was Tad when I got up today. I am Tad now. I will continue. And I think we established that already, so that's about the end of that particular statement. What else? Oh, Lordy. Nothing that I didn't talk about at some length already last night. Namely, just, we're in the process of moving. Deb in particular is very deep in the moving process. The house is filling up with boxes and bags, which is not that the house is any more full, it's just that things are going into boxes and bags. I am trotting over the hill tomorrow to go have a look at how we're going to move various things around so that we can move all the stuff that's here over, those of you who've moved before know how it is. Those of you who have moved as adults, especially as older adults like myself, will know that one accrues a great deal of stuff over the years. Now, fortunately, because we already moved over here and we did that back in May, I think it was, we got rid of a ton of stuff. So fortunately, it will not be as big a deal, but I'll be putting off moving my desk as long as possible because once the desk is gone, I have no place to work. So I intend to wait till the very last moment and maybe even make that the last thing that I take back to the old house, which is about to become the new house. And that's the exciting news on the furniture front. It's not really much to say. Everybody else is okay. Excuse me while I scratch my nose. Everybody else is okay. Everything is okay. I'm working on the book and various other small projects and stuff like that. Not a lot to say. Oh, I did want to mention that a bit of a lesson that I had repeated for me today. This is just by way of personal experiences, but there are times I have found, and one of the reasons that I'm not a big believer in writer's block, and I've said this before in other circumstances, so if you've heard me say it, just ignore the next couple of minutes until I get to the update part. But one of the reasons I think that I'm not a big believer in writer's block is that I think largely it's because people think that if you're writing something or if you are a writer, that inspiration should always be close at hand. And if you somehow can't just reach your hand out and pluck something toward you, that you need to go ahead with what you're working on, then somehow you are failing or have failed as a writer or creator, but especially as a writer, if we're talking about writer's block. And I happen to think that this is poopadoodle. I think it's hooey, to use another made-up word. I don't think it's true. That does not mean that people will not have severe problems, psychological problems, self-confidence problems, and things like that, that will make it hard for them to work. And for writers, that obviously is the work of writing. But I also believe very strongly that sometimes you just don't feel it. You don't feel what it is that comes next. And most competent writers can kind of fake their way through. You can sit down and write 5 or 10 pages and have characters doing things, and theoretically you're advancing the plot on whatever you're working on, and you're doing all the things that writers do, and it looks like a book or it looks like a story. But in reality, you're aware, or at least I am in these circumstances, that something just, it's not there. It's not right. I mean, you can make it look as though you've actually written something, and many people reading it might only notice that it didn't thrill them, but they wouldn't see anything wrong with it. But what that to me usually means is that you've lost the grip on the intuitive truth of what you're writing. And that can happen in a number of ways. It can simply mean that you're overlooking something really obvious, or it could mean you haven't sufficiently generated an organic reason for something to happen. By organic, I don't mean literally made with carbon atoms. I mean organic in the sense of something that arises out of the material you're working on, that it comes naturally out of the thing or out of the characters or whatever, and that it feels right and it feels like, yes, that would happen, or yes, that would be a direction things would go. And so I've said all this before, and at conventions and, doing book readings and things like that. But what it was really reinforced for me today, because I've been sitting around for the past few days in between actual writing, trying to figure out a certain thing that comes next in the Ordinary Farm book that I'm working on now. And because I have had to wander away from Deb's first draft, unfortunately, because it means a lot more work for me, and that her work is not being utilized as well as it should be. But once you make a decision to change a lot of plot threads, it's going to, go a different direction in many places. Anyway, I had a section coming up where I had to make the characters do something to help some other characters. And I'm not going to give details because, first of all, it would be spoilery. And second of all, it just, it's not necessary. But what it was is I was thinking and thinking and thinking of all these sort of confrontational ways for these characters to help another character, like a big fight scene, this and that, kind of the cavalry arrives sort of thing. And I really was like down on myself because I hadn't been doing much work today, and I was just kind of lying around thinking and thinking and thinking and feeling very unsatisfied. And then suddenly I kind of imagined, well, what if this character walked into this scenario where things are being decided, and what would that character suggest? And as soon as I thought about it, I realized, well, that character would suggest this, and that is, in fact, not only the most logical way for these characters to respond to the situation they're in, but in fact, it takes it in a quite different direction, a much better direction for what I wanted to do. And all it required was me exhaustively going through every possible scenario I could think of for hours and hours, and then suddenly thought about one that I hadn't considered, which was a character who hadn't previously been involved in this scene or scenario. And as soon as I just kind of arbitrarily stuck that character in, I realized, well, they would say XYZ, and everybody else would say, oh, yeah, okay, and everything would move forward. Again, organically. It would be a natural thing because it's the safest and best and most sensible thing for everybody to do. But for some reason, it just had not occurred to me until I put myself in the mind of one of the characters who had not been in the scene previously. So, kind of trying to tie all of this together, it's just when you're working on something creative and you're balked, B-A-L-K-E-D, balked, and cannot go forward, it does not mean that you are failing or that there's something fundamentally wrong with whatever you're working on. And I'm extending this beyond, writing, although obviously I started out talking about writer's block because that's a particular thing in my field. But I think it applies to almost anything. You need to give something space. If you don't have an immediate answer, if you don't have an immediate feeling that like, yeah, this is good, this makes sense, whatever your problem may be, you need to give it more time, and you need to try different things. You need to push things around and try things in a different order. I had a good friend, Andy Harris, who I haven't seen in a long, long time, but guy I worked with for a long time. We did interactive television show together in the late 80s and early 90s. And he was a really good, fun person to work with. But one of the things that was both frustrating And exciting about working with him is Andy was one of these people who was never, I'm saying was like he's dead. He's not dead as far as I know. I just haven't seen him for a while. I hope he's doing very well. I hope he's thriving. He's a really good guy. But he would always, you'd be down to the last few minutes on some project. You'd be like literally facing deadline doom. And Andy would say something like, well, what if we just throw all of this stuff out and do this instead? And the first reaction from anybody, and that includes me, would always be, oh my God, what are you saying? We've spent so long to get to this point. And in fact, most of the time, we did not usually wind up throwing everything out or turning everything upside down or suddenly making the bad guy into the good guy or trying, something absolutely crazy. What if we used a hot air balloon? It wasn't anything like that. But it was a method of unsticking the mind from whatever the problem was. Because oftentimes, especially when we're feeling like we're in a hurry, we are very reluctant to change anything about the process that we're in. We feel like every step forward we've taken is immutable. It can't be given up. It's like, an army at war. Like, we dare not give an inch of ground. We fought. We lost lives for this inch of ground. We dare not give it up. But in fact, oftentimes that's the wrong approach. And at the very least, it's useful to say, what if I just did this completely different? No matter how late in the process you are, you don't have to change anything. But it is very useful to think about a big change. Think about, what if everything I've been thinking is wrong? What if we turn this upside down? What if we change the rules? What if we, the most broad and expansive approach to the problem that you can take, including crazy stuff. Because ultimately, it's a better way to solve problems, than continuously trying to force your way forward one tiny iterative step at a time. Anyway, that's what I think. And I did wind up babbling quite a bit there. So as I put in the title of this particular reading, tatting. So I have tatted now for a while. Let us see who is visiting and who has left comments. And I see, and is that Raziel or Raziel? Raziel? Anyway, hello, and nice to see you, and thank you for the blessings from New Zealand, one of my favorite places. Joy, hello, Joy. How are you? Good. Joy says her husband's go-to is, then the sock puppets attacked. Mark, hello, good to see you. Hazel, hello, sweetie. Good morning to you. My God, it must be like 11. No, it's like 5 in the morning there. 2 in the morning? I don't know. I can't think 8 hours ahead. Anyway, Hazel, hi. That's my mother-in-law. Good to see you, sweetie. For once, you're talking to me when your daughter is not asleep. She's out in the other room. But she's been working very hard today. I must point this out. Who else has checked in? So Kristen, hello, Kristen. Good to see you. Joy, I said hello to. Hazel, I of course said hello to. Family. Tracy, good to see you. Isaac, a pleasure as always. Pierre, hello. Good to see you, Pierre. Jeremy, hi, Jeremy. I was just thinking about you today. Angie, good to see you. Claudia, good to see you too. John Lutz. Hello, John. Nice to have you. And thank you for letting me know how to pronounce. And I'm pretty sure that's what you said rhymes with boots. So John Lutz, good to have you. Ron. Hello, Ron, as always. Becca, a pleasure to see you. Emily, you too. Barb Ann, Cliff, and Kelly. Whoops, I lost that there. Good to see all of you. Tim. Brant, that's a new name, I think, or at least one I haven't seen as much, and the ubiquitous and blank more, in this case says, and 6 more. So I apologize for any of you. Tash, hello, there, you're one. And 3 in the morning. Oh, Hazel, what are you doing up so early? It's Hazel, my mother-in-law, has just informed me it's 3 o'clock in the morning in England. Good Lord. I mean, that's like when I go to bed here. That's when all sensible people go to bed, is at 3 in the morning. Anyway, no, only people like me stay up till 3 in the morning every morning or later. Okay, so is there anything else that I need to tell you guys about? Not really. There's no big news on anything. Just stuff. just working. It's going to be crazy. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be here next weekend also, because we're not really doing the big move till a couple of days after that. So I should be around next week. I will, however, of course, let you know if that doesn't turn out to be the case, if there's some emergency change. But that's my current expectation. All right, so since we're getting on here and we've got lots to read, I should perhaps start reading. What do you think? So thank you all for joining me, and we are continuing with chapter, I think it was 22? Was it 22? Let me go back a little bit and see. I don't know why anybody... no, chapter 24. We are in all the way to chapter 24 already. Terrible Flame is the name of this chapter, and in the part that we've just read, character named Framer, who is who is a Thrithings man and part of the Crane clan, because that's the sort of political makeup of the Thrithings tribes, or whatever you want to call them, peoples, is they divide into clans. And Framer and Unver, who is a slightly mysterious character, tall, dark, and silent type, have just been with some of their fellows, including Framer's brother, Odrig, who is the Thane of the Crane clan, and they have been on a raid against the Nabani settlers who are slowly moving out into the Ran, which is the edges of the grasslands. And the grasslands, of course, are the kind of time-honored home of the Thrithings men, or Thrithings folk. And but there are these settlers who've been moving out, and so one of the things that happens is the Thrithings folk tend to raid these settlements and, you know, steal cattle and horses and things like that, and that's what they've just done. And during the course of getting away, Framer is riding out behind Unver after the raid, and Unver has, despite spending a lot of his time saving many other Thrithings men who had been ambushed, Unver at the last moment has found a beautiful big bull, a suitable prize for a raid for anybody, and is bringing him out, and he and Framer are riding out away from the town when somebody hits Framer in the head, and with an arrow presumably, and then as Framer is lying there dazed, fallen off his horse, he sees the people from the town, these settlers, who are running out toward him, ready to finish him off. And then Framer sort of passes out. So that's where we ended, and that's where we are continuing from. For a long time after the sun rose, he couldn't get off his bedroll. Instead, he lay with eyes closed and listened to the strange sounds of the living world that he still seemed to be a part of. Birds. So many birds. Warbling, whistling, chirping, fluting. Their noise seemed deafening. Had it always been this way? Why had he never noticed? Something touched his arm. Framer flinched and tried to roll over, but the sudden movement made his head hurt so badly that he groaned and gave up. Another touch, then a light stroke across his forehead. Frey, are you awake? The voice was like a breeze, cooling him. Kulva. He opened his eyes, but just a little. The light was fierce, like knives. I brought you water, his sister said. How is your head? Like a broken pot. I thought I was a dead man. Don't say that. The spirits who saved you will be angry. The light was a little less sharp now, so he decided to sit up, very slowly. It wasn't the spirits who saved me, it was Unver Longlegs. He could see it now, Unver and Deofol leaping over him where he lay wounded, sweeping down on the settlers to savage them like a wolf among chickens. It was Unver. He must have given up his bull to come back for me. Framer managed to prop himself on his elbows, which was as far as he could get, before a wave of pain sloshed through his skull. Kulva's worried face hung over him like a midday moon. Unver is a good man, but You still should not tempt any spirits, his sister said, frowning. Here, drink. She helped him put the cup to his lips and poured a little water in his mouth. He lifted his hand to take it from her, but she pushed it away. Just let me tend you. Always so proud. I'm a man of the Crane clan. I was only wounded in a fight. I could take care of myself. He knew he sounded like a child. In any case, if the spirits want me to get better, they'll make me better. The beginnings of a smile twisted her lips, but she fought it down. Oh, yes, men on men's business. Forgive me for trying to help you while you lay on the ground moaning. Everyone else has been up for hours. By the Stoneholder, he groaned as he sat fully upright. Why did no one tell me? Is Odrig angry? He laughed. Kulva clearly did not approve. He laughed, then he went off to the lake with Trojan to hunt. That was a relief. Framer pulled himself up so he could sit cross-legged, which helped his balance. His head felt like a swollen bladder. If it got any more full, he thought he would begin to piss out his ears. What are you laughing about, Frey? I don't know. My head hurts. Is there something to eat? I brought you bread. She reached into her apron and pulled out a leaf-wrapped bundle. Framer unwrapped the bannock and took a bite. Chewing seemed to make his entire head feel odd, like a precariously balanced rock that might roll away with a push. He took several bites and suddenly found he did not want any more. Even with food in his stomach, he still felt strange. The colors around him, like the voices of the birds, seemed too strong. Surely the world had never been so bright. The wagons of the clan seemed to gleam like jewels, and the colorful ribbons that decorated them were searing streaks of light. But when he closed his eyes, instead of darkness, he saw Unver standing atop the wall of the settlement, made into a giant by firelight, the anvil smasher come to life. In that moment, the tall clansman had seemed to be touched by divine fire, like a great thane or like something even greater. He saved me, he said quietly. Saved many. What did you say? Here, drink more water. Kulva handed him the cup again. As Framer drank, the colors began to seem less painful, less striking, but his sister was still a brightness hovering before him. She was not beautiful, not as the clan folk reckoned beauty. She was thin, for one thing, and her hair was an indistinguished shade of brown, too fair to be striking. Her skin was also freckled beyond any ordinary notions of comeliness, but Framer thought her kindness and the honest steadiness of her eyes made her beautiful. When their mother had named her Kulva, which meant dove, their father had said, Well, then, she's a bony speckled dove, fit only for the stew pot. But when their mother died in his 4th or 5th year of life, Kulva had taken on the role of Framer's protector. Now he could scarcely remember their mother's face without thinking of Kulva's instead. Their father, Hervalt, had never been kind, but he had never gone out of his way to inflict pain. Framer thought Odrig had inherited the worst of the old man, but without Hervalt's love for his people. And although she would never say anything against the eldest brother who headed the family and the clan, Framer knew Kulva felt the same way. I have to get up, he said. Why? You should rest. I will speak to Unver. A part of him was annoyed that a woman, even his dear sister, should question him. Men of the clans were not questioned, at least not by their sisters or wives. I owe him my life. Unver will still be at his father's wagon when you are fit to walk. No. He got his legs under him, then rose to his feet, shaky as a newborn colt. I am fit to walk now. I am a man of the Crane clan. Kulva sighed. Of course you are. Jakar, stepfather of Unver Longlegs, was sitting on the steps of his wagon, smoking his pipe and scowling at the clouds overhead, which was more or less what Framer had expected. Jacquard was too old and lame now to be a threat to a grown man, but being unable to enforce his will with a fist or a strap had, if anything, only made his outlook on life more unpleasant. He had been a strong, handsome man once, at least so others in the clan said, but now he was little more than bone and sinew, covered with wrinkled brown skin, like a hide left out in the sun and rain too long. "What do you want, boy?" the old man said. "Did your brother send you?" Thane Odrig was one of the few people Jacquard respected, which Framer knew meant feared. "I've come to speak to Unver." The old man took out his pipe and spat. "Speak to Unver? That clod scarcely has 2 words for anyone, and the spirits know he's no use elseways. Went out on a raid and came back with nothing. He saved my life. That's why he didn't bring anything back." For a moment, Framer thought the old man would get up, hobble toward him, and try to strike him. His scowl was so fierce. "Saved your life? By my wheels and whip, that makes him even more the fool. Your father should have drowned you at birth like a kitten, scrawny whelp that you are, as I should have done when mine was given to me too." "Where is he?" Framer did not want to trade words with Jacquard any longer than he had to. His head still hurt, and the walk across the camp had made it worse. He was imagining what it would be like to shove a knife into the old bastard's throat, and considering it just made him want to do it even more. No wonder Unver hardly ever spoke, if this was all he had to speak with. The old man spat again. "Tinkering with that useless pile of sticks of his, which will never be anything but a pile of old sticks, cluttering up my paddock." Framer let his eyes rove slowly across the collection of broken pots, stew bones, and other rubbish strewn on the ground around the wagon. "That's a shame." Now Jacquard did start to rise, his face reddening, but thought better of it after a moment. "Don't loose your tongue at me, boy. I'll have it out of your mouth. I'm not so old I can't teach a pup like you some respect. I still have my whip." "May it give you much pleasure, then." Framer headed for the paddock out behind the ramshackle wagon. Unver's big horse, Deofal, and the others were cropping grass at the near end. Unver was on the far side of the paddock, just outside the fence, hammering ashwood spokes into a wheel hub to replace one that had cracked as it was being mounted. The rest of the unfinished wagon stood nearby in the shade of a paltry copse of aspens, axle end propped on a stone, while Unver made the new wheel. The wagon was still far from complete. Once the wheels were all on, a season's worth of careful ornamenting, polishing, and painting would still remain. Unver looked up from his pounding as Framer approached, but did not speak. The younger man couldn't think of anything to say at first, so he stood and watched until the words came to him. "Last night, Unver, you saved me." The tall man took one hand off the maul and swept straight dark hair from his eyes. He had taken off his shirt and hung it from a branch, and his chest and long arms gleamed with sweat. He stared at Framer for a moment, then shrugged. "I saw no purpose in letting you die." "But you lost your plunder because of me. In fact, you came back with nothing." Unver made a sour face. "You must have talked to my stepfather." "You didn't need to do it, but you helped me. And those others. Why?" "What is the point of leaving men to die?" Unver took up the maul and began pounding at a spoke with precise but powerful blows. "Are we clansfolk so many, then, and the stone dwellers so few that we should leave many dead behind, just to steal a few horses and cattle? Naban horses?" "But you could have sold that bull. That would have paid for all the paint and fittings you're going to want." No Thrithings man could expect to set himself up as a true man of importance, to get married and be respected without his own wagon. It was odd that Unver had waited so long to build one, but he had always been a strange fellow, private, even secretive. "Why do you care?" Unver demanded. "What does it matter to you, Framer Hervolt's son?" "It's my fault. You lost your prize because of me. You could have had all the paint and brass you wanted." "It's true. That is all I need," said Unver. For the first time in a while, Framer saw the anger that Unver hid underneath his silences. The cords of his arms bunched as he rammed another spoke into the next open slot, but he was scowling as though it did not fit at all. "I have the horses already. One day soon I will travel as a man should travel." Something in his eyes changed. For a moment, something long hidden looked out instead. "One day I will go where I want, do as I please, and no one." He trailed off. "So why did you come back to help me?" "Because it needed doing. Because—" Unver gave the spoke a couple of more heavy blows, then abruptly dropped them all. "I'm tired of answering your questions. Your head must still be broken to make you ask so many. You should go and lie down." Framer knew when he was being dismissed, and he also knew that it would be no wiser to anger Unver than it was to anger Odrig. Unver would not beat him, as his brother would, but he would stay angry for days or even weeks, and Framer didn't want that. "Enough then," he said. "Thank you for not leaving me behind." "It is better to be alive than dead," said Unver, which was probably the closest he would ever come to replying in kind. As Framer walked away, he thought he could feel Unver's fury beating out from where he stood like the heat of a bonfire. But somehow Framer didn't think it was him, or even Unver's poisonous stepfather, that made the tall man so angry. "He burns," Framer realized. "Sometimes the embers are low, but they never go out. And someday he will burst into flame." Framer thought again of how he had seen Unver the night before, stretched against the billowing flames and dark sky, and he trembled, just as he had when his mother had told him stories of the vengeful spirits of air and grass that surrounded them. A terrible flame. Chapter 25. Example of a dead hedgehog. Something was wrong. The air was heavy hot, the sky thick with mist. Even the clear waters of Sumiushisa had turned dark and bubbled like boiling soup. Tanahaya stumbled along the banks of this counterfeit place that should have been her home, her heart, the vale of Shiseiron she knew so well. She headed toward Willow Hall and the place of her birth, but found it difficult to walk. The ground was muddy, almost boiling, and the steamy air choked her. Again and again she found herself slipping backward, as though she were trying to climb a long, steep slope. At last she reached the riverside glen where her family home stood, but this too had changed beyond recognition. Fallow, unharvested, the waste. Even the front stairway, a graceful construction of carefully arranged white stones, had become a thing of mud and rubbish. The hall, roofed only by the great willow trees themselves, was now a flesh-picked rib cage of leaning posts slowly declining into the ooze. "Mother?" she called, but only silence was at home. Fearful now, Tanahaya tried to find her way into her childhood refuge, but as if her own memory rejected her, the drooping willow branches were slimy, and the leaves came loose in her hands like hair from the head of a corpse. The deeper she went into the house, the less she recognized, and the harder it was to fight through the choking heat and sinking floor. Every way she turned, some fallen trunk blocked her way, or a jumbled nonsense that should have been a patterned stone floor mocked her. All that kept her moving was the fixed idea that she had some reason to be here, that she had returned for something important, although she could no longer remember what that might be. A section of ground dissolved beneath her feet, and she almost tumbled down into a tangle of muddy roots that waited for her like some sea creature. Pitched forward onto her hands and knees, she kept crawling toward the center of the house, the place where her mother had tended the fire and sang her sweetling soothe songs. But the roots of the willows squirmed beneath her, coiling and writhing like snakes, and it was all she could do to inch forward, her hands and arms now slick with black mud, her eyes full of hot, stinging mist. Mother? At last she could see the hearth, and to her joy she saw that it was whole, the only part of the house not chewed by decay and collapse. All was as her mother had made it and wished it, the fire pit of orderly white stones, the ritual objects set on their low tables of carved wood, jars and bowls and bundles of grassy calm cares and other simples Tanahaya had seen through all her childhood, objects so familiar that even to view their shapes again was to feel a fierce longing for days that were gone. But in the center of the table, as though her mother had only put it down an instant before, sat something Tanahaya had never seen before, an egg made of gleaming, polished witchwood, its pearly gray marbled with a dozen other colors almost too subtle to make out. Just to see that beautiful ovoid made her want to take it up and protect it. Why had her mother left it behind? What was Tanahaya supposed to do? Everything she knew was changed and ruined, and yet this puzzle remained. She heard a noise behind her then, not a footfall, but a long, sucking slither of a sound. Before she could see what was there, the ground beneath her gave way again and dropped her into hot, sticky darkness. All else, the house of her childhood, the gleaming witchwood egg, even the thing that was Tanahaya, I, myself, vanished back into smothering oblivion. She was fighting a war, a terrible struggle against a powerful enemy, and so far she had lost every skirmish. But Tanahaya could not retreat, because the battle was taking place inside her own body. In her moments of clear thought, she knew that it was some kind of poison that was destroying her, not the wounds. Like all of her people, Tanahaya had deep reserves of strength for fighting illness and injury, but each day she was growing weaker. She could feel the filth inside her trying to make its way through her blood to her heart, like savage raiders rowing their warships upriver to attack a great city. She knew that before much longer the corruption would overwhelm her. But this poison that smeared those arrows and crawls now through my veins must be the creation of mortals. If it had been crafted by our cousins, the Hikidaya, I would have lost the battle long ago. It still made scant sense. What mortals would go out of their way to destroy her? If it had been ordinary arrows that had struck her down, she could believe it had been merely the fearful response of a human poacher seeing something strange. The mortals, the sunset children, tended to attack that which they did not understand, as all the Zidaya knew. But the venom coursing through her was something no poacher would use, since it would poison any game it struck down. What sense for a hungry man to risk death or imprisonment to shoot something that couldn't be eaten? No, the venom on the arrows had been meant to kill, and only a child of her sturdy, ancient race would have survived this long. Tanahaya could imagine an enemy who might not want her to reach this place and its king and queen, a mortal who hated Tanahaya's people and meant to keep her away at all costs. But how could such a person have known she was coming? It reminded her of Sejandi and his still unknown fate. Surely in such dangerous times, Lord Jiriki and Lady Aditu would never have told anyone about her mission but those they trusted most. But even if one of Tanahaya's own kind wanted her dead for some incomprehensible reason, why would they give that task to mortals? During her moments of respite from the arrow fever, thoughts like these swam through her head like startled fish. But those interludes of sense were growing less frequent. Tanahaya knew if something did not change soon, she would lose this fight. When she thrashed her way up from the darkness, the next time it was to find a face hanging over her. A young mortal woman, features pinched tight with fear, and her hands pulled tight against her breast, for fear she might accidentally touch the sick creature lying in the bed. "Get healer," was all Tanahaya could say. "Need healer." The woman stared at her in horrified fascination for a moment. Tanahaya realized she had spoken in her own tongue, not in the common speech of mortals. She tried again. "Bring the healer." That was all the strength she had. The dark, the heat, and the rot reached out and dragged her back down into boiling black depths. Next section. "Why do you put water on plants, Aunt Tia Leah?" "Aunt Tia Leah. Why don't they drown? I saw a mouse drown in the moat once. I couldn't reach him, and Grandfather Osric wouldn't help me get him out. He swam for a long time, but then he died." "You drink water, little Lilia, and yet you don't drown. A little water is good for living things. In fact, it is necessary. Too much, though, is bad. Now, hold that candle a little closer, please." The princess thought about this. How much is too much? Aunt Tia Leah was still looking at the plants, not at Lilia. There is no single answer to that question. Lilia loved Tia Leah, but she didn't always like the answer she gave. "Can a plant drown?" "If you give them too much water, yes. Now, please, my darling, let me finish this, then you can help me draw pictures of those flowers I told you about." Princess Lilia's next question was forestalled by the noisy arrival of a young serving maid at the door of the forcing shed. The maid seemed to have run a long way because her face was red and she was gasping. "Oh, Lady Thalia, are you in there?" she cried, leaning on the gate. "Merciful Rehab, I didn't know what to do. Brother Etan has gone down to the city and she's in a terrible way and I just don't know. She says to bring a healer, but I don't know anything about that." "Calm down, girl. I can't understand you. Who needs a healer?" "The strange woman, the one upstairs in the residence that Brother Etan helps you tend. She was moaning and carrying on, and I went to see what was wrong, and then her eyes opened up, just like that. Scared me witless. And she kept saying she wanted a healer. But Brother is gone down to the city." Thalia looked up to the heavens. "Not even one day to tend my garden?" she asked, then set down her watering can. "Calm yourself, girl. I will come. Let me just wash my hands." Lilia didn't really understand why Uncle Timo and Aunt Tia Leah were married, because they were so different. For one thing, Aunt Tia Leah was much taller than her husband, which struck Lilia as very strange. Also, Uncle Timo's skin was brown, but his wife's skin was pale, except on her hands and the back of her neck, where the sun had darkened her. Uncle Timo was quiet and shy and had a limp, But Aunt Tia Leah wasn't ever shy about anything, and she walked so fast that Lilia could barely keep up with her, like now as they made their way swiftly across the inner bailey. She had once asked her mother why people married each other. "Because God sends you someone, then you have children together," had been her mother's answer. But that didn't explain Uncle Timo and his bride either, because they didn't have any children of their own. Lilia's own father was dead, but he and Mother had still had children, Lilia and her big brother Morgan. "Are there any other reasons people marry each other?" she had asked, but Mother had only told her, "I can't imagine any." And Lilia had recognized from the tone of her mother's words that it also meant, "I'm tired of talking." Now, as she hurried to keep up with Aunt Tia Leah, she was wondering about it again. "Why do people get married?" she asked. "Lots of reasons, I suppose." She turned to look past Lilia to the maid. "Hurry yourself, girl. I understand why you had to leave her alone, but that doesn't mean we should dawdle." I am hurrying, Lady Thalia," said the maid. "It just doesn't look like it because my legs aren't so long as yours. I wouldn't have left her alone, but Brother Etan said that Martha wasn't to watch over her any more, so there's just me." Aunt Tia Leah made a face. "Enough explaining, dear. Just keep a good pace, will you? As to your question, Princess Lilia, sometimes people marry because their parents want them to. Other times they marry because they want companionship. Don't frown. That's a very unbecoming face. Companionship means having a friend to keep you company. Do you understand?" Lilia nodded. "And what about lovers? Like in the stories, do they get married?" "Oh, yes. And sometimes they stay in love, but sometimes they don't. I would say it's one of the more untrustworthy reasons for marriage." "Why," Lilia was feeling out of breath, "why did you marry Uncle Timo?" Aunt Tia Leah looked a little surprised by the question. "Why? I suppose, well, companionship, certainly, but mostly because I had never met a kind man, a good man, who also asked so many questions, who was more interested in simply finding things out than in telling other people how things were or how they should be. I don't understand." Her aunt, who was not really her aunt, just as Uncle Timo was not really her uncle, Lilia called them that because that's how they felt to her, shook her head, but with a little smile to soften it. "I really think we will have to talk about this another time, dear. We're almost there, and you are all red in the face. Now save your breath for climbing." Lilia could hear the groans of the maid as she struggled up the stairs behind them, but she did her best to stay right behind Aunt Tia Leah. "I saw the lady before," she said as they reached the landing. "The one who's ill? I think she's a witch." "What do you mean?" "She doesn't look right. She's scary." Aunt Tia Leah didn't say anything, but pushed open the door. The lady on the bed wasn't tied down, as she had been the last time Lilia had seen her. She looked much sicker than before, the golden color of her skin beginning to turn a bluish gray, her face covered in drops of sweat. "Is she going to die?" Lilia asked in what she thought was an appropriately quiet voice. "Brother Etan said she was a zither." "A what?" Her sort of aunt stood beside the bed, staring down at the woman. "No, she is a sitha, the people some call fairies." She carefully seated herself on the bed and began to touch the woman in different places, on her face, her neck. She even leaned forward to put her head against the woman's chest, which made Lilia a little anxious. She still didn't know what either a zither or a sither was, so she was by no means sure you couldn't be one of those and a witch, too. The woman's eyes opened just enough that Lilia could see the whites, then closed again. Then the fairy opened her mouth and let out a long, shuddering breath, but nothing more. "She is burning up with fever," Aunt Tialia said. "Tabitha, you should be bathing her face and forehead with cool water. Wrists, too. I see no water here at all." "There was some yesterday." "Oh, for the love... Go and get some more, quickly. A bucket from the well, and a clean cloth, now." The maid scurried out. She did not seem sad to have been given an errand, which seemed odd, because Lilia would have been furious to be sent away. Aunt Tialia found a bowl that still had a bit of water in it, and used her own sleeve to dab it on the woman's brow. The eyes came the rest of the way open, and for a moment the strange golden stare locked with Aunt Tialia's lovely ordinary brown one. Then the woman licked her lips and said in a whispery voice, "Poison." Her slender fingers closed on Aunt Tialia's hand, and she spoke again in a voice so tiny that even Lilia, for all her worry about this strange person, leaned closer to hear. "Need." "What do you need, dear?" Tialia leaned forward too. "Tell me." But the woman only shook her head, slowly, as if it were a great weight to move. Then she lifted her hand and held it trembling in the air. "She wants the bowl of water," said Lilia. "I think you're right." The bowl was moved closer, and the Scyther woman lowered her hand into it, then lifted it out, the whole operation so achingly slow that it was all Lilia could do not to help her. Then the long fingers reached out toward the stool beside the bed. Slowly she traced a shape on the seat, the water gleaming in the late afternoon sunlight. As Lilia and Aunt Tialia stared at it, the door opened. "Do you have the water?" her auntie asked without looking. "I beg your pardon, Lady Thalia. I did not know water was wanted." Tialia looked up in surprise. "Brother Etan, I was told you were gone down to the city." "I was, Lady Thalia. I was searching for a few herbs that might prove useful. Last time I came here she told me she was poisoned. That was very clear. I have brought back harch and dittany and some refined oil of rue. I do not think either of those will help, I'm sorry to say. Look, she has drawn something with her finger." "The poor creature," said Aunt Tialia. "It was all she could manage." The Scyther woman's eyes had fallen closed again, and her hand had drooped, her arm now hanging off the edge of the bed, even that very small effort an exhausting one. "I looked in on her last night, and she seemed to be sleeping peacefully." Etan moved around the bed so he could examine the seat of the wooden stool. "What's she drawn? Is it a heart?" "I don't know what else it could be." "Perhaps she wishes us to find a herb with heart-shaped leaves?" Thalia pursed her lips. "I must think. Perhaps there is something in one of my husband's books." The maid Tabitha now reappeared, weighed down by a sloshing bucket that she had to carry with both hands, which had clearly made it awkward to climb the stairs because she was all a sweat. "I think I might be about to have a fit," she announced in a mournful voice. "I banged my leg terribly on the way up." Tialia nodded in an offhand way. "Bless you, how sad. Leave that bucket here, yes, and the cloth, and you may go sit and nurse your wounds. If you have a fit, be sure to let me know." When the maid had gone off, rather happily and briskly for someone with a banged knee, Lilia thought, her aunt and the monk mopped the Scyther woman's brow and limbs. When they had finished the task and arranged the blankets over her slender body once more, Thalia said, "Brother Etan, will you go to our rooms and get my husband's book, The Sovereign Remedies? Oh, and now that I think of it, also my copy of Patilin. we may find our heart-shaped herb there. But how do we know she's even right about poison, Lady Thalia? This morning she was raving about mountains walking. We don't even know why she is here, Etan, Aunt Tealia said. Lilia thought she sounded a bit cross. Why balk at anything which might be of help? We must try our best to save her. Of course. She is one of God's creatures, I am sure, regardless of what some think. Not just that, you silly man. Now her aunt turned, and her expression seemed a mixture of amusement and irritation. Can you imagine what my husband will think if we let a living Scytha die before he has even had a chance to see her? Tiamat will be broken-hearted. You recall what happened with the hedgehog, do you not? And that beast was ancient, snappish, and only had 3 legs. Still, when it perished, he was miserable from St. Tunith's Day all the way to the following spring. She made a wry face. Not that I am saying that this is the same. Poor woman. You make a good point, my lady. Brother Etan stood. I will go and fetch the books. He gave Lilia a worried smile as he squeezed past her in the doorway. Lilia thought the monk might be a little frightened of Aunt Tealia. Next section. The Lord Chancellor had far too many things that needed his attention to be idling at the window in this fashion, but it was hard to pull himself away. Below him, fishing boats dotted the Kinslaw like water beetles, and when the wind changed direction, he could hear the fishermen calling, not their words, but just the soft rasp of their voices as they shouted to each other, boat to boat. The sun was still 2 hours or more from noon, but clouds had rolled across the sky, and the water was shiny gray like a pewter plate. Pasquale stifled a brief tug of selfishness. He would regret having to give this view back to Count Eolair when the Lord Steward returned. The window in his own chamber was largely blocked by the bulk of Holy Tree Tower. He liked to stand on top of the tower, but being so close to its walls left only a confining, prisoning view that made his heart heavy, a scene as dark as judgment, as punishment. Do not be distracted, he scolded himself. Froy needs an answer. He turned from the window with regret, but returned to the desk and the latest letter from his informant at the Nabani court, and began to read it a second time. My dear sir, you cannot know how it pains me to say so, but I would not be performing my duty to your kindness if I did not inform you that things are very dangerous right now in this country. The Duke's brother, Drusus, as you know, has made the Grasslanders' attacks on Nabani settlements into a cause of reproach. He rails against his brother's laxity at every meeting of the Dominiate. The conflict has caused great unrest, not only in the mansions of the nobles, but even down in the streets among the merchants, workers, and the poor, so that it sometimes seems people here can talk of nothing else. And Drusus is not entirely wrong, good my lord, to warn of the dangers of this enemy. The folk of Naban have always feared and detested the Thriving's men, who have no fixed homes, no villages or farms, and are little better than savages. And it is true that horsemen have increased their raids of late. In the last half a year they have struck several times, burning crops and villages, and attacking the tenants of the lords who own great houses along the border. This is nothing new, although the murderousness of the raid seems to be increasing. God grant we have no war with them, because the Thriving's men are many, and they are fearsome fighters, although ill-organized. They fight as a disorderly rabble, fierce when they are winning, but prone to dispersal and retreat when they suffer a setback, which is why, for all their numbers, that Naban and Erkinland have been able to keep them penned on the grasslands all these years. Yet, although they remain a great threat, it is not the horsemen, that provoke this letter to you, but rather the Duke's brother. Drusus, despite the backing of several of the eastern and northern lords in the Dominiate, has been balked to this point in his struggle with Duke Saluceris by his lack of support among the nobles whose holdings are far from the thriving's borderlands. His attempts to force his brother into action have therefore always failed. Of late, this has changed. Drusus has recently made a powerful ally, linking his fortune to the Engadarine house, who, as you know, have long been the second most powerful family in Naban after the Duke's own Benedrivine house. Drusus and Dallo Ingadaris have met many times, and it is whispered that soon Earl Dallo will announce that Drusus will marry his niece. I express no disapproval of House Ingadaris, of course. I know our High Queen Miriamel traces half her blood to that family, and Saluceris himself carries their blood in his veins as well. But those were days when the two houses were closely linked, which is no longer true. More and more over the last years they have found themselves at odds, and it is no secret that Dallo Ingadaris wishes the Dominiate, where he is strong, to have greater say over Naban's government. That can only happen if Duke Saluceris is weakened, and that is the reason, of course, that Dallo has shown favor to Drusus by offering him his niece Turia. Pasivales didn't bother to reread the rest. Small bits of other business he had asked Froy to undertake for him, most of which concerned the ongoing struggle between Ostenard's two greatest trading powers, the Sindicato Perdruine and the upstart Northern Alliance. But none of the rest of Count Froy's news had the import of Drusus's marrying Dallo Ingadarine's niece, which would add a huge complication to an already intricate, dangerous situation that Pasivales had been worrying over for months. Drusus was growing in power too quickly, and Duke Saluceris seemed unconcerned, or perhaps was actually helpless to fight back. To Pasivales it all smelled of disaster. Sometimes it was hard not to wonder whether he had been helping the wrong brother. And I think we're going to stop there, even though it's kind of in the middle of a section, but there's no real stopping point for a while. So I am going to wrap it up. Yes, okay, very good. I'm going to wrap it up there for the night. And as I said at the onset of tonight's reading, I'm pretty sure I will be back next week, and we will continue with the further adventures of the Witchwood Crown and its cast, for lack of a better term. And I hope you will return and join me at one of those points, or whenever is convenient for you, since we are also available on my social media pages. And thanks to Chris Fab, we are also available on YouTube as well. Anyway, so again, much gratitude for your presence and for your support, and I will see you soon. Take good care of yourselves and take good care of your loved ones and your friends and neighbors. We will all stick together. We will all make it through together, one way or the other, through this thing called life, brothers and sisters. So, peace, be well, and I will see you very soon.